Hello, and welcome to episode 1 of Stucky's Travels.
Even though it doesn't feel like episode 1 because we've done 15 takes at this point.
Or more.
Thank you so much for giving us suggestions of places to talk about yesterday on our Facebook post. Costa Rica was one of the ones that was talked about first, so we're going to start there. We think it could be fun for science and social studies, e-learning, just entertainment, learning about a new place.
So grab your passport.
And get your shot for hepatitis A and your shot for typhoid fever, and away we go. San Jose is the capital of Costa Rica. This is the main city for flying into. We flew from Chicago. I believe you can also fly from Indianapolis as well. We had a layover in Panama City and then to San Jose.
We picked up a rental car, which we thought was pretty cheap until we got the insurance. And it wasn't.
So I don't recommend getting a rental car in Costa Rica. It was very reasonable, but you are forced to take their insurance, and even if you have your own American insurance, it will cover it. So not a great deal, but there are public buses that go very regularly all over the country.
The nice thing is, when you're trying to get local stuff, $1 is about 572 of their Costa Rican colones.
San Jose was a really nice capital city. You can see the architecture of this building, which is currently being used as a post office.
And they had a lot of very beautiful buildings all around, including some very beautiful churches, like this one, St. Teresa Cathedral, in the northeast part of the city.
We were also impressed by the street art. This is just a few of the different street art graffiti pictures that we saw, but there were entire buildings that were covered, and you could tell there was a lot of artistic thought that went into some of the different paintings that we had seen on some of the buildings.
A lot of different parks in San Jose. We actually parked in one spot and walked around. It's a pretty easy town to walk around in. Maps are readily available, and it's a pretty simple, large city to actually get around. You see a lot of parks in one day, and a lot of neat structures in the parks as well.
They even had an area called Walking Street, so there were shops on both sides, but you didn't have to worry about traffic because it was pedestrian only.
There's some more pictures of the beautiful parks. So while we were there, one of the Costa Rican-born citizens, sculpturist, Jorge Jimenez de Heredia, his sculptures were out on display, and they're displayed all over the world, but we got to see a lot of them. They're on display for a certain period of time throughout the town because he was born there.
So it's a really interesting artist, so if you want to learn more about him, you can look him up. Just some more of the beautiful churches. They were, you could just pop into any of them. There were a lot of people that were just praying at the pews. Really nice city. You can see how everything's very clean and nice.
So this gives an approximation of our route. This isn't exact, but having the rental car was fairly helpful for the fact that we wanted to not just go to one or two spots. We started in San Jose and spent a day there, and then drove down to Jaco Beach. Along the way, we saw a lot of things you guys will see coming up. And from there, we drove up to the cloud forest around Lake Arenal and got to see the volcano. And then back to San Jose, driving through a couple of other parks.
You can see, though, that we only covered the Pacific side. Central America has, both the Atlantic and the Pacific, or the Caribbean Sea, on each side, and they're fairly narrow, so you could actually go from one side to the other. We chose this time to just try to hit the Pacific side, but it would give us another trip to someday do the Caribbean Sea side.
And a lot of people that do marlin fishing actually do that off the Atlantic coast side.
Okay, so Crocodile Bridge is one of the famous stops along the way to Jaco Beach. You are safe because you're standing up on top of the bridge, but you're looking down at a lot of crocodiles, and so it was just a really cool spot. They On one side of the bridge, there's some little shops, and they know that tourists stop there. So in the books we read that it was suggested that we should pay someone to watch our vehicle. So we paid someone $1 to watch our vehicle while we went and took pictures of the crocodiles from the top of the bridge.
And then before we got to Jaco Beach, just past the Tarcoles Bridge, was the Carrara National Park.
It was a really beautiful park. It was a nice one to start with. Really simple trails. It wasn't an extensive trail system, so we were able to cover the main trails in just a couple of hours. And it was our first exposure to one of their national parks. It was easy walking, but we got to see a lot of different birds, bird nests. The plant life is just amazing, and there were a lot of iguanas as well. We did see a couple of monkeys at this spot as well, but we weren't able to get great pictures of the monkeys here. But there are 4 different types of monkeys that live in Costa Rica, and we'll talk about some more of those later.
Now, even though this is a rainforest, this was a drier time of year, and so it seemed somewhat like a dry forest, except for the type of fauna that was growing throughout.
Some more pictures from the park. Some of those are blurry, but because we were pretty far away from them. The bottom left-hand corner, woodpecker, really, if you've seen the cartoon Woody Woodpecker, it was exactly like that type of woodpecker, which was really cool. And then the top middle picture is an agouti, and it was like streaking really quickly across the trail, so we were able to just get a brief glimpse of it at that time, but you can Google an agouti to see better pictures.
And the picture in the top right corner was a little tiny insect, looked almost like a little ball of dust, but it was moving. And when we picked it up, we could see little tiny legs coming out of the underside. So it was very neat. It's probably only about a half a centimeter long or less.
We tried to ask a few different guides later in the week about what it might have been, but nobody was able to identify. So if you have a lot of time on your hands and want to try to figure out what that little insect was, that would be great.
And coloration is key for a lot of these animals and how they can survive. If you look close, there is a lizard in this picture. Some of you guys might spot it right away. Some of you are going to need a little bit of help. Ding.
So camouflage is an important defense mechanism for a lot of creatures, whether it be here in Indiana or anywhere else in the world. So you're going to see some pictures of camouflage in some of the pictures today. We can't really talk about Costa Rica without talking about a lot of plants and animals, because that's what Costa Rica is truly known for.
Let's go back real quick. So if you guys notice all the leaves that seem to be dead leaves, around here we have a lot of deciduous trees where the leaves fall off during the fall, come back in the spring. That's not exactly what's going on here. Even though we have dead leaves, the trees are pretty much green year round, but the leaves get old and get replaced. And that's really why these dead leaves are on the ground.
You can just, this picture just gives you a better idea of the dense nature of the forest. A lot of competition amongst the plants trying to fight for sunlight.
So one of the first things we did just outside of Jaco Beach was actually go on a waterfall tour. And we used this company, found this company, Neofauna, partly because it was a lot cheaper than a lot of the other ones, but it was a little outside of town. Again, having a rental vehicle really helped with us getting and finding these other places. But we got to do kind of hike around and see 8 different waterfalls.
Yeah, I think that what Miles said is really true. You can look online and find, just from sitting at home here in the U.S., and find companies that'll take you on waterfall tours or Jeep tours or ATV tours, but those companies are often more than twice as expensive. The local companies aren't spending as much money on worldwide advertising, but once you get to a location, you can ask the locals where are some reasonable local places to do this. And Miles and I were able to have a tour just to ourselves. It was the 2 of us with a guide for about 3 hours. So we had to wear a helmet because we were climbing up the waterfalls over that time period. So you can see me with my little protective helmet on.
Yep, and the picture underneath Michelle again, a little bit of camouflage. The lizard that's somewhat blending in. It's not very brightly colored like a lot of people always think of green lizards or something. And you can see just the variation in the waterfalls also in these pictures.
The poison dart frogs are something to always keep your eye out for in Costa Rica. If you've been to a zoo, they might have even had an exhibit of the poison dart frogs. And so my question to our guide was, if I touch one, am I gonna get poisoned? And um, I'm big enough that it wouldn't do major damage to me. Miles can talk more about that. But each of these pictures has a poison dart frog in it. And some of them are going to be easier to find than others. So if you want to pause with your family and look for the poison dart frog, you can. And the arrows are going to pop up briefly.
So the poison dart frogs, their toxin really kind of seeps out. It doesn't seep into our skin, but and don't eat them or you will get sick and possibly die. But it gets onto your skin, on your fingers. And so if we actually grabbed one of these and held it, and then 2 hours later forgot and rubbed our eyes, there's a chance we go blind for a while. And they may seem cute, but they're really tiny. They were actually really hard to see. Some of them were about half the size of a dime. So here's where they are if you couldn't find them all.
Again, camouflage is definitely something that you'll see a lot in Costa Rica. This picture has a bird, so you can take a minute to try to see where the bird is. There's the bird. The right hand side has it's a very blurry, zoomed in version, but you can see a little bit more of how blended in it really was with its environment.
Now, this was a crane-like bird.
So this one has the Jesus Christ lizard. It's known as that because it looks as if it's running on water. Again, camouflage. This is the similar lizard of a picture you saw earlier. There's the lizard.
And just some more pictures of the waterfall, the beautiful scenery, the coloration. You can see this moth was actually on the underside of the leaf and actually blended in not only with the coloration of the leaf slightly, but found a way to hide by hanging on to the bottom, the underside.
Like it says on there, our guide was only 21 years old. He was training to be a Costa Rican biologist. Their testing is extremely rigorous. A lot of tourists go to Costa Rica and hire a guide to teach them about the plants, animals, but there's so many different species to learn. So he was learning insects and lizards and birds and plants all at the same time and taking tests on those.
Some more waterfalls. Obviously, we got to swim in some. The water felt a little bit chilly, but it was a pretty warm day, as most days are down in Costa Rica. But there's a Jeep. We kind of drove through the creek to get up to the waterfalls and as we were driving, every now and then as we drove past, we get to see one of the Jesus Christ lizards run across the road with its big, wide feet and its kind of gills splayed out.
So this is Herradura Beach in Costa Rica, and there was a person selling meat on the beach, so that's what Miles has on the far left. But one of the really cool things to do in Costa Rica is to eat at the little local soda shops. And so soda for them doesn't mean a drink, it's talking about a local eating establishment. And the food that you'll see in both of those meals that's plated is kind of the traditional dish. It's called casada, and it consists of rice, beans, and then some sort of meat. So like I had beef in that middle picture, Miles had fish in the bottom corner. Really, really reasonably priced for how much food you got. And then the blue thing.
Yeah, the blue thing was a little tiny worm on the beach. We barely saw it. It was only about an inch and a half long, and it was just moving through the water. The tide was going out, so the sand was still very wet. It was a marine worm, definitely not a land or terrestrial worm, but it was using the tide pools to kind of come in and out and get food and feed.
And so we've come to the end of our time for episode 1, but we're going to continue with episode 2, so stay tuned.